Hi everyone, welcome back to a new weekly podcast. And today I got Belinda O'Dea again with me. So some of you may know a few weeks ago we had an interview and we ran out of time because there's so much I want to ask her. So we're doing part two. But if this is the first time you hear us talking, then so here's a little introduction. So Belinda is a heart-based certified yoga meditation teacher. And she's qualified in Hatha, Mantra, Tantra, Vinyasa and Yin. So kind of like everything that I know of the yoga style. She's also an accomplished fashion designer before she's doing all that she's doing right now. So that was really interesting. And we did talk about that, her journey before in the last interview. So you can check it out if you want to hear how you can pivot from a fashion designer to a yoga goddess teacher. So, and she's clearly passionate about yoga, travel, and wellness. And she also takes women to beautiful retreats several times a year to North India, South India, and Japan. So she's originally from Australia, but clearly a citizen of the world. And Belinda also runs women's circles, and where she creates a safe, welcoming, and inspiring space for all women to participate, to feel the connection and importance of the sisterhood. So, which I'm really excited to ask her more about today because we ran out of time last week. So, no, last time. So she also offers personal business mentoring one-to-one for women. So very interesting what she's doing. And so welcome to my show again, Belinda.
Thanks, Ewing. Good to see you again.
Yes, I'm really happy we get to do this because I know you're quite busy as a citizen of the world that I managed to get you twice in a row. So I'm really happy. So first of all, let's dive into the questions that we didn't get to talk about. And I think let's start with the women's circle because I think you call them goddess circle. And I'm really curious about, because I'm writing a book called Becoming a Goddess, and one of it is about community of support, how important it is for us to get together, women empowering women and sharing. And tell us a bit about these circles that you run. And I know that you just did one in Australia and you have a few coming up as well. So tell us a bit more about that.
Yeah, thank you. I call it Women's Goddess Circle because there's certainly a magic that happens in circle that I haven't seen happen anywhere else. So you know that I run yoga tours and retreats overseas in India and Japan predominantly. And over the 5-6 years that I've been running those retreats, more than even the yoga and the meditation that I teach, I see the transformation and the openings happen in the Women's Goddess Circle. So it's a space, a space held by a facilitator or leader. So we sit in a circular, configuration, and normally sitting on the ground or sitting on bolsters, what have you. So we sit in a circle and it's basically connecting in with some history of women sitting together and sharing what's happening in their life, telling their truth, speaking from their hearts, listening with their hearts. And in Goddess Circle, it's particularly important that we create, or the facilitator in particular creates a very safe space for women to open and share. And the way that that's done in my Goddess Circles is that I have a very strict set of agreements that we make at the beginning, and I outline those detailed agreements, and they set the tone for all of the women to know that they're in a space that's confidential, they're in a space that is with no judgment, and a space where they're encouraged also not to judge themselves and their own inner judgments, the inner judge, and to tap into being kind, listening with their hearts and sharing their truth. Because as you know, in like this day and age, we have this tendency in social media in particular to show a happy, shiny version of ourselves. And that's not necessarily, it's definitely not always the case. And it's kind of a false economy. And so what I find is that you could call these circles so many different names, and many of my ladies create their own names. So like a trust circle, a sharing circle, a women's circle, goddess circle, whatever it is that speaks to you. It doesn't really matter what the name is, but it is about women coming together, and they don't need to be any specific age. In fact, I find that I get a really great breadth of ages and life stages, and I know we're going to talk a little bit more about life stages a bit later. And we come together, I set the agreements, and most often I will set a topic. And I will talk a little bit about that topic. For example, the last topic that I spoke about in this last goddess circle that I held was about the spiritual practice of menstruation. And in that I gave an outline of the different seasons of a woman's menstrual cycle, and then I put the question over to the women as to what was their first experience of their first period. And so we know that the first period is one of the rites of passages of a woman's life, and it's a pretty fundamental one where we're stepping into womanhood. And that is, whether you realize it or not, it's an initiation. And so most of us go, oh my God, the initiation that I got was, I had no idea what was happening, or what have you, whatever their personal experience is. And so then we move around the circle, and in that particular circle, that's what we spoke about and shared about. So it's a very confidential notion that whatever happens in circle stays in circle. So there's a lot of openings that happen, and most often women sit, and when they're starting to talk or answer the question that's being asked, things arise that they never would have put together in any other circumstance. So this spontaneous inner knowing starts to piece together parts of their life, and makes this idea of inquiring into ourselves and knowing ourselves better in the yogic tradition. It gives that this extra layer of inner resolution. So I often think of, and I don't think anyone else says this, but this is how I see it. So in yoga, we have Ayurveda, which they say is the sister science to yoga. And that's all of the herbs and the healthcare approach and the lifestyle approach to yoga. And I say that women's circle is like the other sister of yoga that should be included in all kind of yoga. Because it's another way of discovering things about ourselves that don't necessarily arise, even sometimes when we speak to our girlfriends, because there is that tendency for us to wear masks and to maybe not want to reveal all of the truth that's really happening in life.
Wow, fascinating. Because, while you were starting to explain, actually, my first question was, so how do you prevent people from like oversharing or dumping, or like treating it as some sort of that type of event where you would just start pulling out some negativity? But then as you explain, I realized, so you mentioned about the agreement, the respect, but also you actually take us on a particular topic that will guide our conversation and discover something. Because often we may have like, oh, he did that to me, like, so whatever, in the top of the head, but then you take us to a different topic and angle, and then we actually have to stop that thinking and focus on often topic I assume is related to your inner world. So it's actually quite really like interesting, and things that I think we don't often talk about, because the topic you just mentioned about our first menstrual cycle experience, it's something that we don't often just hang out, have over a cup of coffee and talk about it, right? But you as you said, you discover a lot of things when you actually get into it. But then how do you, I guess you set up the atmosphere, and because of you as a facilitator hold the space and energy, but how do you get women to talk about something quite personal? Like, so, I mean, I guess I just haven't been to your circle, and I'm sure I can tell people about it when I've been, but it is something quite sacred. So how do you encourage women to open up from the beginning? Do you have certain meditation, or what do you do? Like, so people know what to prepare, instead of just thinking, oh, I'm going to go there and talk about menstrual cycle.
Well, in general, the girls that come along don't necessarily know what the topic's going to be, unless it's, so there's two types of circles. And the one that I just referenced was an open circle. So that means that it's not a set number of members, and it's just whoever decides to come along on that day. So that's an open circle. And there's lots of different approaches to that. And of course, I mentioned that I did the one about the rite of passage of having your first period or starting menstruation. But for example, it can be quite a broad open circle where I ask, say, 2 questions. What's your biggest struggle right now? And what are you most grateful for right now? To give kind of both ends of the scale of the inner world. And so how do I enable women to be safe? The agreements set a really strong tone. I spend quite a bit of time going over them, and even if you have sat in circle with me, you will hear them again. I'm finding that this work's really needed, and that almost more than half of the women that are coming to my circles, and they've been quite large circles, have never sat in circle before. And I set the tone very, very firmly that this is not public speaking, that this is not a place where you'll be judged. And it's also a place where you will speak from your own feeling, inner experience. So we don't bring up anyone else's names, or we don't reference anybody else in the circle. And I in my own way, encourage them just to center inside. So they have I don't have it with me, but I'm holding it like this because I have a stone. I've got one that lives in India for my circles in India, and one that I've got here, and it's a talking object. So whoever is holding the object is the only person that speaks. And that's really important because we don't want, the women, this tendency that we jump in, we want to help, we want to fix, we want to nurture. So one of the agreements is that we don't need to fix or help anyone in the circle. We're just there to listen. And I encourage them to drop down into their heart rather than listening with this mind, let's fix it, just feeling and listening with the heart. And I do that at the beginning of circle by doing a centering exercise with them. And that looks different depending on the group and what they need. And that's a lot of what I do depends on the situation that I'm sitting in at that time. But it will be some sort of a general centering where we rein in all of the energies of being a woman. As you well know, that we're constantly going outside of ourselves, and our energy is going off in all different directions. So before we begin, and even before I share the agreements with the ladies, so that I know that they're going to be listening to me, I center them, I have them draw all of those things back into themselves, and so that they feel quite solid, and I can feel it in the room once that's happened. And then we come back to being wide awake, and I share the agreements, and then we start, depending on the topic, we start going around. And it's a space where the ladies are not obliged. They might just come and listen. Quite rare that someone will skip their turn, but they're more than welcome. It's one of the agreements as well, that if you don't feel like talking, you don't need to talk. You can just listen. And it's a special space that I've not experienced in any other way, place. It's something. It's like it's old knowledge of ours that we're remembering, to sit and hold space for each other without comment and judgment or fixing. And another main thing, which I think is really interesting for women, and I know that they struggle with it when they first come to circle, is that as female beings, the Shakti, I think we mentioned it in the last interview, we are emotional beings. So we have emotional fluctuations constantly. So when someone receives a stone and starts to speak, sometimes it just emotion arises. So our normal tendency in life as women is to go to that person, want to comfort them, want to hold them, want to give them a hug or hold their hand, or just put a hand on them so that they know that you're there. But in circle, we give them space to allow that emotion to be freed. So often if we do go to someone to help them what we think is supporting them in their emotional struggles, it actually often stops them from expressing that emotion. I know myself, and I think it's quite common for most women, that when you start to feel emotion coming out, the first thing you want to do is stop it. You don't want to show it. So it's a really beautiful space in that some tears come and laughter comes and everything in between, and it's all accepted. And yeah, it's something that's very different and something I feel blessed to facilitate.
Yeah, it sounds like a beautiful process. And we talk about self-care all the time in coaching and personal development, and sometimes I think we're a little bit too overboard with fixing something, getting better, and doing the being part, where you say just sit there and share and listen, and it's not about jumping in and helping, but stay still. I think it's a wonderful way to honor ourselves as women. And how often do we actually allow ourselves to just sit there and celebrate us being women and honor that and holding that space? So I think that's definitely like a beautiful thing for women to do, and that's actually for me a big self-care activity. Even
Mm,
though you may just sit there and listen, you may not go and jump in and get help and all that kind of stuff. But I think it's really a wonderful and powerful way to be still and to be clear.
mm,
And next question I want to ask you is related to what you mentioned a bit earlier about the rite of passage, because in Joseph Campbell's world, he talks about how women naturally have our initiation because we got the menstrual cycle. So whether from a girl becoming women and then motherhood and then menopause, all that, it's kind of biologically lead us to that sort of initiation. And for men, the shamans need to, or men, young men in tribes need to go to a cave to feel the fear and all that kind of stuff to have that initiation. So I often find the notion of rite of passage really interesting. And I know in your work, you also talk about the different rite of passage, because I only mentioned a few, and I think you may have more. So tell us a bit about your take on rite of passage. What does it mean for women?
mm. Um, well, the thing is that the rites of passages happen regardless of whether we're aware of them. So often by the time, and even it was the case for me, almost all of them have happened when I actually learnt about them. And so I'm now often teaching women who are menopause or post-menopause, and we're backtracking all of them. But
Mm,
regardless of when you come to the information as it stands and as I understand it and I share it, is that the first rite of passage is the passage of birth and being born into the world. And the way that we came into the world and were born, so our experience of birth, so the way that we physically came into the world, how much time, whether there was intervention, all of those things. Um, all of the words that were used around you arriving and you being in the world for the first time, they give an imprint. So that first rite of passage gives an imprint of how your life is going to unfold. So we say whatever happens at the beginning sets the tone for what's going to unfold. So the first rite of passage being birth and being born. Second rite of passage, as we mentioned just before, is for women. I'm speaking specifically for women today. Is the rite of passage of menstruation, so moving from being a girl into a woman. Then we have the third one is the first sexual experience. Then we have pregnancy as a rite of passage. Now, pregnancy is not always the case of an actual baby being born. So often, all pregnancies are honoured in the rites of passages that I share, and that can include miscarriage, abortion, losing a child, stillbirth, and not necessarily even having a physical pregnancy. So when we're in the motherhood stage, with the rite of passage of pregnancy, um, there's many things that we see, gestate, and birth that may not be actual physical babies. And I'm sure you can identify with
mm,
this with your book as well.
mm,
So there's lots of projects and maybe businesses or relationships or all different manner of things that can be birthed in that peak motherhood phase where pregnancy is the rite of passage. Then our second last rite of passage as women is menopause, and in the autumn phase of our lives. So when we're in the menopause and heading towards going past menopause, we call it autumn, that you become the autumn woman, the harvest queen. So all of the rites of passages, they come as they're additional. So the one that came before informs the next one. So the women that are in their menopause and then receiving the harvest of all of the previous rites of passage. And so, for example, you know that menopause now is a huge struggle for most women, and that can be healed and worked on through backtracking and going back to the previous rites of passages and doing the work on those. So exploring the birth story, exploring the first menstruation, exploring the first sexual experience, exploring the pregnancy and motherhood phase. So there's a lot of healing work that we can do retrospectively. So it doesn't mean it's never too late. And there are also stories and information that you can go seeking at any time of your life, and not necessarily just once. So it's not that you talk about your birth story once and then you might get some insights. There's, as we know with all other spiritual practices, there's layers on layers of information that we can receive from going back and investigating these rites of passages. And for me, it's just another arm, or I think about my work now actually as like Durga with all of her arms, so many arms, all this goddess work, and the same with you, I guess. And so there's so many arms. And so for me, it's just another part of yoga, because it's another way of knowing yourself deeply, as you said, in this feminine body, in this female existence, where we're learning how to try and rest into being and accepting who we are more and more, hopefully through the practice of yoga.
Wow, it's beautiful because, as you just talk about each stage of rite of passage, I just realized, wow, yeah, we probably hardly think about it if we don't get prompt to ask these questions, because how often do we think about, my mother had a very hard time to give birth, and then what does it mean when I come through that way? Does it mean that it's always a struggle, or a fear of hurting? I don't know. Like I realize there's so much depth into going back and think about all these passages, or your first sexual experience. Like, how often do we to be honest, in this modern day, a lot of people may be like using alcohol and it may be a blur. I mean, who knows? and then when you talk about giving birth, and I have obviously one experience giving birth to my first daughter, and now I'm having a boy, and I'm sure it will be different each of these births, and it's always exciting and nervous all at the same time, and it will obviously clearly will affect him, and it will also affect me. So it's actually a lot to think about, and as she said, it's like different layers as a woman, and I do think that at each passage we pass through, we kind of enrich a little bit, because now I think about my first blood and my first sexual experience. I mean, you kind of accumulate different ideas about who you are in relation to the world. And sometimes some of these initiation were great, some of them was not so great. And you were like, what? And I imagine if a girl, what if you got really embarrassed with your first blood because you just all over your dress and something? I mean, it will be really affecting someone's psyche, and we may not even know how deep it actually went until we actually did this type of work to uncover and discover. So I found it really powerful, and I never thought about it in that way, and in a way I'm excited to go forward, because each of these will be very significant if we actually take that attitude. So it must be very powerful for you to actually sit through all that with other women, because for them to get the aha, seriously, like for the first time, those who sit in some circle and discover that, could be very powerful for other people to hear too.
It's I've got shivers, because it's the aha is so obvious and bright, and sometimes not necessarily something that's uplifting, but just something that makes sense. For example, a woman was in one of my circles, made the connection of she was a breech birth, and was very they turned her, and then she turned herself back again. She didn't want to come out, so she came out breech feet first, and with all of the intervention that you can imagine to help get her out. And she had suffered depression her whole life, and she made the connection in that circle, listening to like connecting with her birth story, that she had been in that same struggle of the way that she entered the world to this day. And so it's not always pretty what we find out, but it definitely informs our experience of ourselves, and it helps us to accept where we're at much more. And I think this type of work needs to be done with somebody that's journeyed the work themselves. And so, for example, I told you that I've been running open circles, but I'll be running a closed circle coming up in the next few months. And that will be a closed circle, which means it's a set amount of members, and the members only remain the same, and they commit to journeying through these rites of passages. So it will be a 6-week program. We'll be going through each of the 6 rites of passages, and in a closed group or a closed circle, you get that extra added layer of getting to know each other too. I mean, circles in general are really community builders. The embraces and friendships I see formed at the end of circles are why it makes me think, why aren't all yoga studios doing this, because it's just such a beautiful way to have people, women, come together. And you know what it is, in the most part, it's that their experience becomes normalized. So they hear their voice through all of the other women, and they go, oh, it's not just me. That person had an experience like that too. I feel better. You feel the support, because you know that you're not alone. And that's, I think, the most transformational thing that happens in circle, is hearing your story through everyone else.
Wow.
And of course, going through the rites of passages, there's so much gold there that, it's a very beautiful experience, but also quite confronting doing this type of work, like any sort of excavation work and diving into the self, it's sometimes quite challenging as well.
I bet. But keeping the happy badge, it's not going to get deeper in life. And at some stages, the women, you want more, and the only way to go more is go deeper. Instead of going wide and out, it's actually going in and deep. And I think, this is what we really needed in our times, to go deeper, and not just on the surface, on the pretty pictures on Instagram. Nobody take an ugly photo of themselves. I mean, most people like, oh, I feel horrible today, let's snap and say, hey, everybody, I feel horrible. Nobody do that. Everybody is presenting the happy outside, but actually they ask for bigger need to go deeper inside. So, and that leads to my last question today. It's about your retreats overseas, because I know it's a longer, like you take long, like obviously it's not 2 hours, 2 days, it's a longer retreat. And so what do you do, especially when you take women on a journey? Do you expand on everything you talked about? And I mean, do you also visit some places that is sacred? So tell us what's the gist, because it sounds so fun.
It is absolutely fun. I have 3 programs. They're all 10-day programs. So yes, it's quite a long time to immerse yourself with a group of like-hearted women. So we definitely go deep. And there's 3 different aspects that I work on. So in North India, it's more of a spiritual pilgrimage, and it's the program that women usually come to when they've never been to India before. So when they want to tick India and spiritual India off their bucket list. So being of an age, I'm also not interested in doing any backpacking around India. So we have a really beautiful boutique hotel experience where we, in that particular trip, we go and tick off the Taj Mahal from the bucket list. So the ladies get to go and see and immerse themselves in the love story that's the Taj Mahal. And then we go to one of my very dear and near to my heart spiritual homes, which is Varanasi, which is the holiest place in India. You might have heard of the Ganges River, or Mother Ganga, as we call her, because she's also a goddess. And so my first trip to India, I landed and stayed at a boutique hotel that was right on Mother Ganga, with an internal staircase that goes down to the stairs they're called the ghats, and they're the stairs that go down to the river. And so I sat and meditated at sunrise on my first day ever in India, and ever since it called me back. So there's a beautiful Shiva temple that I go to there. And so I like to teach in an embodied, experiential way. So yes, each day we do yoga and meditation, but we do self-inquiry through different ways, depending on which retreat it is. And in North India, we also do a lot of rituals. So many of the ladies that come with me are either celebrating a big birthday, or they've got to an age where they're starting to lose their parents. So we often do some ancestry work where we honor the death of their loved ones, because Varanasi is also famous for their cremations. And so we actually, like we just talked, I'm not sure if I mentioned the last rite of passage, but the last rite of passage is death.
Yes, you did.
Yes. And so in Varanasi, that becomes a topic of conversation, because we go and we see the cremations as they're happening. And death is something that's celebrated in India. Not celebrated, let's have a party, but it's celebrated as a final rite of passage, and it's very important the way that it happens. So we see that, and we start to open up that conversation about death, and we also we do some rituals to honor those loved ones that have passed. And so that's a really connecting experience on that one. And then at the end of that trip, we end up under the Bodhi tree, where the Buddha attained his enlightenment. And so we end up sitting under there and doing meditation. And that's kind of how that trip rounds out. And on that particular trip, actually on both of my India trips, I teach a mantra meditation technique with mala beads. And I'm now offering workshops in that in Australia, so that more people can experience how to do mantra meditation with mala beads, because it's actually, meditation is not an easy thing to get into if you've never tried it before.
I tried once, and I know what you talk about being difficult to get into. I mean, half of the time I was fighting my teachers, like, do we have to? Like, seriously.
So it's a simple technique that helps with the concentration and the focus. And so I do that. So that's in North India. Then South India is normally ladies come with me 1 year, and they tick India off their bucket list, and then they want to go deeper. And the next year they often come back, and they come to South India with me, and that's called North India is called Divine Mother India, and South India is called Living in Alignment. And that's I hold it at an Ayurvedic retreat center. And that's much more about learning to live in a yogic way and Ayurvedic lifestyle. So changing over food habits and daily practice habits. And in that retreat, we work through the rites of passages, and we spend each day, there's a workshop of a couple of hours. So we do lots of beautiful things, including daily massages and treatments depending on what each lady needs. So she has a daily doctor's appointment, and there's a program created for her for herbs to take, and massages or different treatments depending on what her body needs, and that's all tailored. And then beautiful vegan, vegetarian food, and yoga and meditation, and then my wellness workshops each day too. So that's a really amazing retreat where you just really escape daily life, and it's kind of resetting the inner compass and really reorienting to how you want to live your life, and then stepping back into life. And then I after my retreats, I now often mentor women. So it's not easy to say, here, have 10 days of this amazing lifestyle and then go back into your regular busy life and implement everything on your own. So I've created a hand-holding process of mentoring, which is a program called Inner Light Bright. And it's really just using, excuse me, sharing practical tools. Just need to have a drink.
Well, just while you were drinking your tea, I was like, I'm composing myself, but I'm in a drilling. It sounds amazing. Like, yes, the North India ticking off the boxes to Sin Taj Mahal sounds amazing. But then I thought the second one, it's also really juicy because, get daily massages and eating one. You just immerse your whole 10 days of treating yourself and in a very natural environment. It just sounds so amazing, especially, we work so hard during the year. And and while you were talking, my baby was kicking like he wants to go. Like he wants to go. It was hilarious. So yeah.
I do get a lot of I get a range of women, but a lot of burnt out mothers come along on the retreat, and women that have been mothers for a long time, so maybe have been mothering for 20 years, and perhaps are finally out of the active mothering phase, but haven't yet rediscovered who they are, not being a mother or a full-time mother anymore. So there's a lot of that inner discovery that happens in living in alignment. And then just to top it off and kind of round up our conversation about femininity as well, I have a program in Japan called the Art of Femininity, and that is a cultural yoga tour. So in India, North India is a spiritual yoga tour. In Japan, it's a cultural yoga tour, and the Japanese women they know how to stay in that being sense so much better than a lot of the rest of the world. So through the art forms that are in Japan, we experience, so we wear kimono, we do flower arranging, we learn calligraphy, we learn how to do Zen meditation, we stay at a Zen Buddhist temple up in the mountains. So we have all of these beautiful sacred experiences, all the whilst doing mindfulness meditation and yin yoga, and then immersing ourselves in the culture that is Japan, which is just one that's spectacular, and one that I was blessed to grow up in when I was younger.
Wait, hold on a minute. So are you saying that in the Japanese one, it's more about immersing yourself in the beauty and in the honoring a woman? Like it sounds like it's quite different, because even though you say it's a yoga retreat and wellness retreat, it seems like the feel would be very different, because it's all about beauty in some ways, isn't it? Just sitting there as a woman, you talk about the flower arrangement and wearing kimono, and that would be a very different feel than being in India, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a very different feel. It's very interesting to me because there's a lot of threads that actually move through both. And for example, in Japan, we end up on a sacred mountain, which is a heritage listed place that practices esoteric tantric Buddhism. In South India and North India, we do rituals that are from the tantric tradition. So we do the same fire ritual at the Living in Alignment retreat in South India as we do in the sacred mountain or Koyasan in Japan. So there's these interesting threads. We worship nature through fire ritual in both places. We worship nature by being immersed in nature and connecting with herbal medicine and food from the earth, because all of the food in here is grown on the property, and all of the herbs as well.
Sounds so delicious. I'm like so slime.
We do that in India, and then in Japan, nature worship is Shintoism, which is the dominant religion. So it's different but the same. But yes, of course, Japan is about refining ourselves and taking ourselves out of that active doing, thinking, giving role that we have as women, and we rest into the receiving, being, feeling. So the women receive how to do the art of calligraphy and spend time doing something that they would never normally spend 2 or 3 hours doing in their regular life.
You would probably drive me banana for the first day, but I think I can get into it after.
You would slow down. You would slow down after a few days, no doubt.
Yeah. Well, it sounds so beautiful. So for people who are like me, salivating on the side, what's the best way to get in touch with you and check out your programs and, you know, in any possible way to connect with you? What's the best way to find you?
Yeah, my website's the best way to get all of the information of what I'm up to, both locally in Australia and internationally. And through the website, you can see all of the brochures for each of my programs. We've got North India coming up in September, South India in October, and then Japan will be next May in 2021. And of course, loads of local events happening in the upcoming months in Australia. So yeah, belindaodea.com is, and I'm sure that you'll link it in the
Yes,
notes.
I will put a link at the bottom of the blog post, and then you see in the podcast notes as well. So thank you once again for Belinda for this really lovely conversation, and I'm so eager to, you know, do something good for myself. Like, you know, everything you mentioned seems so delicious. So anyway, thank you so
Thank
much for
you.
today.
Thank you. It was an absolute pleasure.